The Affordable Care Act. You've definitely heard of it, right? For more than a decade now, it's been one of the most talked about, most debated laws in modern American history. It totally reshaped an entire industry and touched the lives of millions. So the big question is, how did it actually work? What did it really change? All right, let's get into it.
Okay, to really get a sense of the scale here, just look at this number. 20 to 24 million people. That's how many more people had health insurance by 2016, just a few years after the law really kicked in. I mean, that's not just a small change. That's a staggering number of people.
So, a number that big brings us to our central question for today. How on earth did one single law manage to completely change the healthcare game for millions and millions of Americans? To figure that out, we've got to go back a bit to see what things were like before.
Right, so before we can even talk about the solution, we need to understand the problem. What was the ACA trying to fix in the first place? Let's take a look at the state of American healthcare before 2010.
If you had to sum up the system back then in one word, it might be unequal. I mean, listen to this quote from a study in the American Journal of Public Health. It says, "Large disparities in health insurance coverage related to race and ethnicity are a long-standing feature of the U.S. healthcare system." Basically, it was just an accepted fact that your access to healthcare it wasn't equal.
And wow, this chart right here just lays it all out. These are the uninsured rates from 2013, right before the ACA's big changes took effect. Look at this. For white adults, it was almost 15%. But then it jumps to nearly 26% for Black adults, and an incredible 40.5% for Hispanic adults. We're not talking about small differences here. These were massive, massive gaps. So that was the problem. What was the ACA's big fix? Well, it was this really comprehensive overhaul, and it was all built on what you can think of as three main pillars. Okay, so officially, we're talking about the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or ACA. It was signed into law on March 23, 2010. And this wasn't just some minor tweak. This was landmark legislation. It was actually the biggest shakeup to American healthcare since Medicare and Medicaid were created way back in 1965. Now, these are the three pillars, and the key thing to understand is how they were designed to work together. Think of it like a three-legged stool. The first leg is guaranteed issue. This meant insurance companies couldn't deny you coverage just because you had a pre-existing condition. But that creates a new problem, right? People might just wait until they get sick to buy insurance. That's where the second leg comes in, the individual mandate. This required most people to get insurance, which pulled healthy people into the system to balance out the costs. But how can people afford it? Well, that's the third leg, subsidies and exchanges. These were online marketplaces with tax credits to help make insurance affordable. See how they all lean on each other? If you kick one leg out, the whole stool topples over. And it wasn't just about those three pillars. There were other really big changes baked into the law. For one, it allowed states to expand their Medicaid programs to cover more low-income adults. Another big one you probably remember, it let young adults stay on their parents' health plan until they turned 26. The law also defined a set of essential health benefits that every plan had to cover. And, this is a huge one, it banned insurance companies from putting a lifetime dollar limit on how much care you could receive. So, the law gets passed. But that was really just the beginning of the story. What followed was an immediate, intense, and years-long fight for its very survival. I mean, from the second it was signed, the ACA was under siege. The political opposition was fierce, and it got hit with dozens and dozens of lawsuits from states, from organizations, from individuals, all of them trying to get the courts to strike the whole thing down as unconstitutional. And this timeline here really shows you how fast this all happened. Look, the law is signed in March 2010. By January 2011, less than a year later, a federal judge in Florida says it's unconstitutional. The case just rockets up through the courts, and by March of 2012, it's being argued in front of the Supreme Court. The whole country was waiting for their decision, which came down just a few months after that, in June. So everything hinged on that individual mandate. The big legal question was, can Congress force you to buy insurance? The Supreme Court's answer was no. They said Congress couldn't use its power over commerce to make people buy something, and for a moment it looked like the law was doomed. But then came this incredible pivot. The court said while Congress can't force you to buy insurance, it can tax you for not having it. So the penalty for being uninsured was reinterpreted as a constitutional tax. It was this totally unexpected legal twist that ended up saving the entire law. But that wasn't the only major part of the ruling. The court also tackled the Medicaid expansion. They ruled that the federal government couldn't force states to expand their programs. It had to be optional. And that decision had massive consequences because it basically created two different Americas when it came to the ACA, states that expanded Medicaid and states that didn't. Okay, so the law survives this huge Supreme Court challenge. But after all the fighting, what actually happened? What was the real-world impact? Let's dive into the data. All right, so just as a quick refresher, this is our before picture from 2013. Remember these numbers? Uninsured rates were high for everyone, and those gaps between white, Black, and Hispanic adults were just huge. Now check this out. This is the after picture from 2014, just 1 year later. The uninsured rate dropped for every single group. But here's what's really amazing. The biggest drops were for minority communities. The rate for Black adults fell by more than 5 points, and for Hispanic adults, it dropped by over 7 points. Those massive gaps we saw before, for the first time, they actually started to shrink. So you might be wondering, where did all these newly insured people come from? Well, this chart breaks it down perfectly. It was split almost exactly 50-50. About half got their coverage from the Medicaid expansion, and the other half got it by buying insurance on those new online marketplaces. So let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. What's the bottom line? First, the ACA did what it set out to do. It cut the uninsured rate roughly in half by 2016. Second, it made a real dent in those long-standing racial and ethnic disparities. Third, the numbers don't lie. The coverage gains were way bigger in states that decided to expand Medicaid. And finally, it's really important to note who wasn't covered. Undocumented immigrants were left out of these major parts of the law. So there you have it. The Affordable Care Act insured millions, and it absolutely narrowed disparities that had been part of the system for generations. But as we all know, the debate over healthcare, about cost, about access, about the government's role, is far from over. And that leaves us with the big, lingering question. What's next for American healthcare?